The air in Millfield's town square was thick with dust and desperation. Debt day. It was the day futures were bought and sold like cattle, where a man's bad luck became another man's property. And on the courthouse steps, a woman and her baby were for sale. Quite Merriweather watched from the edge of the crowd, his face a mask carved from desert wind and hard secrets. He wasn't supposed to be here. Fences needed mending, life needed living. But his horse threw a shoe, and fate had a funny way of putting a man right where he needed to be. The auctioneer's voice cut through the silence. Lot 17, one Lotta Mitchell, age 22, and infant child. The words were clean. The reality was filthy. When a man died in debt, his family paid the price. They called it indenture settlement, a pretty name for selling people. Lotta Mitchell stood on the platform, a broken bird with fight left in her eyes. She was thin, dressed in faded yellow, a shawl failing to hide the ugly purple bruises on her arms. But her chin was up, her gaze defiant. In her arms, she held a baby girl, maybe 6 months old, sleeping through the nightmare. The auctioneer read from his papers. Husband died in a logging accident. Left considerable debts to the Millfield Mining Company. Terms are 7 years' service. 7 years. A lifetime. Quite knew the story. Everyone did. Dillard Mitchell was a dreamer who borrowed too much and died too soon. The mining company had been patient. Now their patience had run out. "Let's start the bidding at $50, the auctioneer said. Silence. $50 was a lot for 7 years of work, especially with a baby included. A voice from the back of the crowd cut through the tension. 25, and I'll take just the woman, don't need the brat. Quite's head snapped around. Darred Petty John. He owned the saloon and the sad-eyed girls who worked upstairs. Girls who had a habit of disappearing. Lotta's composure finally broke. Fear flashed in her eyes, and she clutched her baby tighter. 30, for both, another man shouted. Granville Caton, a farmer who'd buried 3 wives. All accidents, they said. The bid started flying then. 40, 45, each number a hammer blow on Lotta's future. Petty John yelled, 45, final offer, and I'll throw in a job for her sister, if she's got one. The crowd let out an ugly laugh. They all knew what kind of job he was offering. Lotta went white as a ghost. The baby started to cry. Quite had seen enough. He'd watched good men do nothing his whole life, stood by while the wolves picked off the sheep. Not today. $100, he called out. His voice was a blade. The entire square went dead silent. $100 was more money than most of these men saw in a year. It was unheard of. The auctioneer stammered, "Did you say 100, Mr. Merriweather?" "For both the woman and child," Quite confirmed, his voice steady as rock. Petty John spun around, his face red with fury. "You can't be serious, Merriweather. That's throwing good money after bad." Quite just looked at him. "My money, my choice." "But why?" Caton called out. "Your place is barely big enough for you." Quite didn't answer. The truth was, he wasn't sure himself. Maybe it was the bruises on her arms, maybe it was the fire in her eyes, or maybe it was the ghost of another woman, another time he'd been too scared to do what was right. 110, Petty John snarled. 150, Quite said, without a moment's hesitation. The crowd was buzzing now. This wasn't a debt auction anymore. It was a fight. Lotta was staring at him, her blue eyes trying to solve the puzzle of who he was and what he wanted. She'd learned long ago that nothing came for free. "Going once," the auctioneer said, his voice shaky. 200, Petty John screamed. The number hung in the air. $200 could buy a man almost anything he wanted in a town like Millfield. Quite thought of his ranch. The small house he'd built with his own hands. The years of saving, every penny earned with sweat and blood. Sometimes, principles have a price. $500. Quite said, his voice quiet but carrying across the square like a thunderclap. The world stopped. $500 wasn't just money. It was a statement. It was a new life. It was impossible. The auctioneer's jaw dropped. Petty John looked like he'd been struck by lightning. Nobody pays that kind of money for, Caton whispered but didn't finish, for damaged goods, for a widow with another man's baby. Quite swung down from his horse. He walked to the auctioneer, pulled a heavy leather pouch from his saddlebags, and started counting out gold coins. The soft clink of metal was the only sound in the square. 500, he repeated. Cash. The auctioneer was sweating, looking around for help, but everyone was frozen in shock. Going once, going twice. Lotta Mitchell stood perfectly still, her baby in her arms, her world tilting on its axis. Sold, the auctioneer croaked, to Quite Merriweather for $500. The crowd erupted in a roar of confusion and excitement. Quite ignored them. He walked to the platform, every eye in town on his back. Lotta flinched as he got closer. Mrs. Mitchell, he said, touching the brim of his hat, I'm Quite Merriweather. She studied his face, looking for the trap. I know who you are, she whispered. The rancher from Willow Creek. Your baby, he said, nodding to the bundle in her arms. Boy or girl? Girl, Lotta replied, a flicker of warmth in her voice. Her name is Emma. We should go, Quite said, glancing at the gossiping townsfolk. They've had enough of a show for one day. Lotta didn't move. Mr. Merriweather, I need to understand. What do you expect from me? It was the question hanging over everything. The indenture contract made her his property in the eyes of the law. I expect you to help me run a ranch, he said simply. Nothing more. And if I can't, if I'm not strong enough? Quite looked at her, really looked. At the steel in her spine, the fire that hadn't been extinguished. You're stronger than you think, he said, and strength can be built. He held out his hand. She hesitated, then took it. The crowd parted for them like the Red Sea as they walked to his horse. A man doesn't pay a fortune for a woman and child without a reason, and Millfield would be talking about that reason for years to come. He untied his horse, a sturdy bay mare. Can you ride? He asked. Lotta nodded. I grew up on a farm. Good, he said, handing her the reins. You take the horse. I'll walk. She stared at him, bewildered. She's yours to use, he said. Ranch work. Lotta mounted, settling the baby in her arms. Quite started walking down the road leading out of town, away from the whispers and the judgment. Emma chose that moment to wake up, her eyes the same startling blue as her mother's. She looked at the strange man walking beside them, her face serious. She's beautiful, Quite said. Lotta's expression softened. She's everything good I have left. They left Millfield behind, the dust settling on the strangest auction the town had ever seen. Ahead of them lay 20 miles of open country and a future neither of them could have imagined. For the first time in a long, long time, Lotta Mitchell allowed herself a flicker of hope. But hope was a dangerous thing. And she knew, deep in her bones, that this was far from over. The silence of the prairie was a welcome change from the noise of town. Quite walked with a steady, long-legged stride, never getting too far ahead, but always keeping a respectful distance. Lotta watched him from the saddle. He was a puzzle. A man who spent a fortune he didn't have for reasons he wouldn't explain. Men like that were either saints or devils, and she'd never met a saint. He was the one who finally broke the quiet. Your husband, he said, his voice careful. The logging accident. Were you there? Lotta's hands tightened on the reins. No. They brought him home on a wagon. Said a tree fell the wrong way. She paused, her eyes fixed on the horizon. That was their story, anyway. Quite looked up, catching the doubt in her voice. You don't believe it. She took a deep breath. Dillard. He was drinking more, getting angry. She looked down at the fading bruises on her arm. These weren't from any accident. A cold knot formed in Quite's stomach. He'd suspected. I think he made enemies, she whispered. The mining company was pressing him. He owed money all over. When he drank, he got mean. I think someone got tired of it. He hurt you, Quite said. It wasn't a question. He could see it in the way she flinched at sudden movements, the way she carried herself like she was braced for a blow. He wasn't always like that, she said, the words sounding weak even to her. Before, he was different. The debts changed him. And Emma? He asked gently. Was he a good father? Lotta let out a bitter little laugh. Dillard claimed she was his, but Emma was born 8 months after our wedding, and Dillard was gone for 3 of those months. The math was simple. The implication was enormous. In a town like Millfield, a child's parentage meant everything. Does it matter? She asked, her voice sharp, defensive. Who her father is. Quite thought about the law, about inheritance, about shame. Then he looked at the tiny, perfect baby in her mother's arms. No, he said, and he meant it. It doesn't matter. She's yours. Some of the tension left her shoulders. It was the answer she needed to hear, but never expected. They stopped by a small creek to water the horse. Lotta found a shady spot to nurse Emma, and for a moment the scene was almost peaceful. A mother, a child, a quiet afternoon. It was a lie, but it was a beautiful one. Mr. Merriweather, she said, once Emma was settled, I need an honest answer. He straightened up, sensing this was important. Why did you do it? All that money. Don't tell me it was just charity. $500 is too much for a good deed. He didn't answer right away. He looked at the creek, at the water flowing over the stones, like time itself. I knew a woman once, he began, his voice rough. During the war, her name was Fern. He told her the story. About a love lost, a promise broken. About Fern's father losing their farm and Fern being sold to pay the debts. Just like Lotta. What happened to her? Lotta asked, her voice barely a whisper. By the time I found out it was too late, Quite said, the old pain raw in his voice. The man who bought her, he wasn't a good man. She tried to run. They caught her. She died in a winter storm, trying to get away. Lotta's breath hitched. I swore that day, he said, his eyes meeting hers. I swore I'd never stand by and watch that happen again. When I saw you on that platform, with Petty John looking at you that way, I couldn't walk away. The truth settled between them, a heavy, sad thing. You're trying to save her, Lotta said softly. Through me. Maybe, he said. Or maybe I'm just trying to do something right for once. They rode on as the sun began to dip, painting the hills in fire. As they crested a ridge, Quite pointed to a valley below. There, that's home. It was a modest place, a small house, a sturdy barn, cattle grazing peacefully. It looked like a sanctuary. Where will we stay? She asked as they got closer. It was the question she'd been dreading. There's a spare room in the house, he said, not looking at her. Small, but it's yours. It has a lock on the door. A lock on the door. 2 simple words that meant everything. He was offering her safety, not just shelter. He helped her down from the horse, then reached for Emma. The baby went to him without a fuss, her tiny hand reaching up to touch his weathered cheek. She likes you, Lotta said, surprised. Babies know things, Quite replied, his voice gentle. Standing there in the golden light of dusk, holding another man's child, Quite felt a shift deep inside him. For years, his life had been a long, lonely road. Now, that road had forked. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain. A storm was coming. But for the first time in a long time, Quite Merriweather didn't feel like he was facing it alone. The spare room was small and dusty, smelling of disuse. It had been his brother's, he said. Foster. He'd lived there for a while after the war, before he decided ranch life wasn't for him. The words were flat, but they hid a deep wound. Lotta put Emma down on the bed. I should start earning my keep, she said, her voice turning formal, businesslike. She was building walls again, retreating behind the safety of their contract. Employer, servant. The chickens need feeding, he said, sensing her retreat. But it can wait. You must be exhausted. I'll pull my weight, she insisted, same as any hired hand. He saw the stubborn pride in her eyes and didn't argue. Supper's in an hour, was all he said. Alone, Lotta sank onto the bed. This morning, she was facing a living hell. Now, she was in a safe house with a man who treated her with a strange, formal kindness. It was too good to be true, and things that were too good to be true usually were. Dillard had been charming, too. At first, she trusted no one, especially not men who performed grand gestures. They ate a simple meal of beef stew in near silence. Outside, a storm broke, rain lashing against the windows. The sound woke Emma, and quite, to Lotta's surprise, went to fetch her. He held the baby with a competence that was startling, rocking her gently as she fussed. She doesn't seem scared of the storm, he noted. She's been through worse, Lotta said quietly. She's lucky to have you, he said. Lotta's laugh was bitter. Lucky? I'm an indentured servant with nothing to my name. You love her, he said, his voice soft but firm. You'd do anything to protect her. When they were bidding on you, you never once thought of giving her up to make it easier. That's what makes her lucky. She stared at him, speechless. He saw her, not as damaged goods, not as a burden, but as a mother. The moment was broken when Emma grabbed his shirt, babbling happily. The domestic scene felt like a dream, a dangerous dream. I should put her to bed, Lotta said, pulling back, rebuilding her walls. Back in her room, with the storm raging outside and her daughter sleeping peacefully, Lotta lay awake. The house felt solid, safe, but her mind was a whirlwind. Who was quite Merriweather? Was he a grieving man trying to atone for a past failure? Or was there another reason he'd paid $500 for a woman who knew the mining company's secrets? The question echoed with every clap of thunder. What did he really want from her? Weeks passed. A routine settled over the ranch like the first winter frost. Lotta worked from dawn till dusk, proving her worth. She cleaned the house, tended the garden, and cared for the chickens. But it was in the barn that she came alive. Quite owned a paint mare named Dancer, a beautiful animal with clear Arabian bloodlines. Lotta's father had raised horses, and she knew quality when she saw it. She's magnificent, Lotta said, her hands expertly checking the mare's legs. A fool sold you this horse. He was down on his luck, Quite said, leaning against the stall, watching her. He'd seen the transformation in her, the confidence that came from doing work she loved. She needs a good stallion, Lotta said, her eyes shining with an excitement he hadn't seen before. There's one over at Wickline's place, an Arabian Spanish cross. Could we? She asked, her voice full of hope. Would you consider it? The eagerness in her voice was a physical thing. I don't see why not, he said. Before she could celebrate, the sound of hoofbeats broke the morning peace. 3 riders were coming up the lane. The man in front was Sheriff Foster Wickline, but the 2 men with him were strangers. One was older, dressed in an expensive suit. The other was younger, with the soft, cruel face of a man who'd never worked a day in his life. Stay here, Quite told Lotta. She vanished into the shadows of the barn. Quite, the sheriff said, his voice strained. Sorry to bother you. The older man dismounted. I'm Granville Caton from the Territorial Legal Office. This is my assistant. We're here on behalf of the Millfield Mining Company. The name hit quite like a punch to the gut. "We're here about Lotta Mitchell," Caton said, his voice smooth as oil. "What about her?" Quite's jaw was tight. "There seems to have been an irregularity in the auction," Caton said. "The company has determined your bid was questionable." "Nothing questionable about it," Quite shot back. "I paid in full. The sheriff was there." Wickline looked at the ground. "Everything was proper, but Mr. Caton has concerns." "Concerns about my motivation," Quite finished for him. Caton smiled, a cold, empty thing. "The company believes you may have discouraged other bidders. That your $500 bid was an attempt to manipulate the proceedings. It was a lie, but a clever one. A lie that could be twisted into a legal weapon." "That's an extraordinary sum," the young assistant piped up, "for a woman of questionable reputation." Quite took a step forward, his hands clenched into fists. "You want to explain that?" Sheriff Wickline quickly stepped between them. "Easy, Quite." "The point is," Caton interrupted, "the mining company wants to renegotiate. They'll pay you back your $500, with a profit, in exchange for Mrs. Mitchell's contract." "And if I refuse?" "Then we pursue other legal remedies," Caton said. "The courts don't look kindly on auction manipulation." It was a threat, wrapped in a legal bow. "How much time do I have?" Quite asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. 48 hours, Caton said. "After that," he shrugged, letting the threat hang in the air. They rode off, leaving a cloud of dust and menace behind. Lotta emerged from the barn, her face pale. "I heard," she whispered. "They want me back." "They can want all they like," Quite said. But the words felt hollow. "You don't understand," she said, her voice shaking. "The mining company owns this territory. If they want me, they will find a way." He saw the resignation in her eyes. She was already giving up. "Tell me about the debt," he said. "What did Dillard really do?" Lotta hesitated. "It wasn't just gambling," she finally admitted. "He was stealing, taking money for equipment he never bought, wages he never earned. They said he owed $1,800. $1,800, an impossible sum." "There's more," she said, her voice dropping to a terrified whisper. "He wasn't just stealing from them. He was selling their secrets, survey reports, new claims, to their competitors." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. "When they found out?" She swallowed hard. "I think that's why he really died. It wasn't an accident. They had him killed." Quite's blood ran cold. This was never about a simple debt. This was about silencing a witness. "They think I know something," Lotta whispered. "They think I have proof, documents, names, something that could destroy them." The ground had just fallen out from under them. "You should let them have me," Lotta said, her voice flat with despair. "Take their money, walk away before they destroy you too." Quite looked at her, at this woman who had survived so much, now willing to sacrifice herself to protect him. He saw her courage, her fear, her fierce love for the child in her arms, and he thought of Fern, who had died alone. "No," he said. His voice was quiet, but it was the hardest sound in the world. "But they have lawyers and money," she pleaded. "What do we have?" Quite allowed himself a grim smile. "We have the truth," he said, "and sometimes that's enough." That night, another rider arrived, Icy Wagner, his closest neighbor, a woman made of iron and grit. "Heard you had fancy visitors," she said, taking a cup of coffee. "Sheriff Wickline stopped by. He's worried." Icy's sharp eyes took in Lotta, the baby, the tension in the room. "I'm guessing this has to do with the young lady you brought home." Lotta explained the situation, her voice trembling. "He paid too much, and now it's causing trouble." "Intentions don't matter when you're dealing with the mining company," Icy said, her voice hard. "What matters is having friends who will stand with you." "This isn't your fight, Icy," Quite warned. "The hell it isn't," she snapped back. They've been bullying this valley for too long. It's time someone pushed back. What can you do? Lotta asked, a sliver of hope she couldn't suppress. Icy smiled, and it was a dangerous thing. Honey, the trick isn't matching their money. It's making the cost of winning higher than they're willing to pay. Her plan was audacious. If the company wanted to go to court, they would give them a court case they would never forget. They would drag every dirty secret, every backroom deal into the light of day. They would talk about Dillard Mitchell's accident. The last thing they want is a public trial, Icy explained. They're betting you'll back down. And if they don't? Quite asked. Then we make it very, very public, Icy said, her eyes glinting. I know a few judges who owe me favors, and I have some documentation on the company they'd rather keep buried. Lotta stared at her. Why? Why would you do this for a stranger? Icy's face softened. Because someone has to, and because, she paused, her voice thick with old pain. I lost a daughter to men just like them. I couldn't save her. But maybe I can save you. The 48 hours ticked by. The ranch became a fortress in waiting. Icy brought allies. Ranchers tired of being pushed around. Townspeople who had been wronged. Lotta could feel the storm gathering. She knew this wouldn't end in a courtroom. It would end in blood. Maybe I should just run, she said on the last night, holding Emma tight. And go where? Quite asked, cleaning his rifle. They'd hunt you down. This is bigger than you now. I never should have involved you, she whispered, her voice choked with guilt. He put down the rifle and stood beside her, looking out at the sunset. You didn't involve me, he said. I involved myself, and I'd do it again. She looked at him, and in his eyes she saw not pity, but a fierce, unwavering resolve. For the first time, she let herself believe he wasn't going to abandon her. Just then, they heard it. The sound of a dozen horses riding hard. They're here, Quite said, his voice grim. He grabbed his rifle. Get in the back room with Emma, bar the door. Don't come out no matter what. I won't hide while you die for me, she cried. This isn't about courage, he said, his voice harsh with urgency. It's about keeping Emma safe. Now go. She ran, dragging a heavy dresser in front of the door. Quite stepped onto the porch as 8 riders fanned out in the yard. Caton was there, along with a hired killer named Tinsley, whose eyes were cold and dead. I trust you've considered our offer, Merriweather, Caton called. I have, Quite said. My answer is no. Tinsley's hand drifted to his gun. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Before we proceed, Caton said, pulling out a document, I have a warrant for the arrest of Lotta Mitchell. Theft, conspiracy to defraud. A warrant, a piece of paper that made murder legal. Let me see it, Quite said. It looked official. It was dated yesterday. They had bought themselves a judge. Step aside, Caton ordered. And if I refuse? Tinsley drew his pistol. Then we conclude this anyway, just messier. The world held its breath. 8 guns against 1. It was a suicide stand. Then, a rifle cracked from the ridge above the house. One of the hired guns screamed and fell from his saddle, clutching his shoulder. Another shot, from the other side of the valley. Tinsley's hat flew off his head. The hired guns panicked, spinning their horses, looking for a ghost army. Gentlemen, Icy Wagner's voice boomed from the barn. I suggest you reconsider. She stepped out, flanked by 2 other ranchers, all holding rifles. More figures appeared on the ridges, in the windows of the outbuildings. The ranch was surrounded. The hunters had become the hunted. Caton's face was ashen. This is illegal! We have a warrant! You have a piece of paper bought by murderers, Icy shot back. It doesn't mean much out here. Tinsley, recovering his nerve, snarled and raised his pistol toward Icy. Suddenly, from the darkness of the main house window, another rifle barrel appeared. The voice that spoke was one Quite hadn't heard in years, a voice he thought he'd never hear again. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." It was his brother, Foster. Foster stepped out of the house, rifle leveled, his face hard and changed by years quite couldn't account for. The surprise was a physical blow. Caton and his men were stunned into silence. "What? How?" Quite stammered. "Long story," Foster said, never taking his eyes off Tinsley. "Turns out ranch life wasn't for me, but taking down crooks like the Millfield Mining Company is." He hadn't just left. He'd been working undercover for the territorial marshals, building a case against the company from the inside. "This warrant is a fraud," Foster announced. "The judge who signed it is already in custody. And Mr. Caton, you're under arrest for bribery, conspiracy, and accessory to murder." Tinsley laughed, a wild, cornered animal sound. "You have no proof." "Oh, I think we do," Foster said. He looked toward the house. "Lada, it's safe now." The barricade scraped away from the door, and Lada emerged, blinking in the lamplight. She wasn't just holding Emma. In her other hand, she held a worn leather ledger. "Dillard wasn't a traitor," she said, her voice clear and strong. "He was a whistleblower. He was gathering evidence. He gave this to me the day before he was killed. He told me to hide it, to give it to someone I could trust if anything happened to him." She looked directly at Quite. "This ledger," Foster explained, "details every bribe, every falsified report, every man the company has had killed to protect its claims." Caton's face crumpled. It was over. But the final twist was yet to come. Lada looked at the younger man, Caton's assistant. "And it details Dillard's final secret," she said, her voice filled with cold fury. "The reason he had to die, the reason they wanted me and my baby silenced forever." She pointed at the young man. "Emma's father isn't Dillard Mitchell, it's him, the son of the mining company's owner. He forced himself on me, and when he found out I was pregnant, he sent men to scare me. The bruises Dillard gave me weren't from him. They were from him trying to fight off the company's thugs." The truth landed like a bomb. The hired guns, realizing they were the pawns in a rich man's disgusting game, slowly turned their weapons on Tinsley and Caton. They were killers, but even they had a line. Justice came swiftly in that valley, not by a judge or a jury, but by a community that had been pushed too far. When the sun rose the next morning, the ranch was quiet again. The mining company's empire was crumbling. Lada was free, the debt erased by the truth. She stood on the porch, watching the sunrise, Emma cooing in her arms. Quite came and stood beside her. "You have a home here," he said, "for as long as you want it." She looked at him, at the man who had bought her, saved her, and shown her what true strength was. She saw not a savior, but a partner. "I think," she said, a real smile finally reaching her eyes, "we're already home." They had faced down the darkness together and won. Their future, like the valley stretching out before them, was wide open and full of promise. If you were moved by Lada's fight for freedom, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Your support allows us to keep telling stories about the moments that change everything.